I know you like talking about topics that are not really brought up in a normal conversation, and I really admire you for that. And talking about courage and being courageous, I saw something that you wrote for the New Yorker, and you talked about an experience, a traumatic experience that you had when you were 8 years old. And I'm wondering if you could maybe share that. If not, it's completely fine, up to you, and maybe give some advice to someone that might have undergone something similar.
I mean, I wrote an essay for the New Yorker called "The Silence" about my experience of being a child rape survivor. Rape is, again, one of those great silences in our community, certainly is in the Caribbean community, certainly is the community that I grew up in. There's certainly more resources now than there's ever been for people to deal with these kind of traumas. I think that, I know for a fact it's probably was one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with in my life. Made a lot of things difficult for me. That kind of, the lasting scars of that kind of violence, of that kind of violation. But I do think that we're fortunate that there's more resources than there was in my time, and certainly I think that if one finds himself with, kind of unprocessed trauma, it doesn't have to be sexual, it can be unprocessed trauma that sort of is just weighing you down. I think fortunately we're in a place where you don't have to completely come at it from a place where this would strike anyone as alien. The idea that, therapeutic approaches help, the idea that one should find a trusted person to bear witness, that one should attempt a process of healing, a process of metabolizing the trauma. Again, when I was young, this would have been an impossibility. If someone had brought all this stuff up, people would have been like, "Nah, I'm not crazy. I don't know what you're talking about. That's for crazy people." Fortunately, things have really changed and things have gotten a lot better. I think the hardest thing with any trauma is how lonely these traumas make us feel. I think a lot of times if we're feeling an enormous amount of loneliness, if we're often, consumed by loneliness, if we're like in a party and we feel alone, if we're with our family and we feel perpetually alone, there's a lot of reasons that could be. But I think one that's worth addressing or worth sort of being in dialogue with yourself is asking, are there any deep-seated traumas that you haven't been able to process? And, I never even thought that there was any deep-seated traumas. This had happened to me when I was a child and I put it away, didn't think of it. I never thought it was any problem, even as it was slowly devouring my life and kind of slowly putting holes through my heart. It wasn't until much later that I actually began to ask myself very important questions. And often, it's hard for people who've suffered to be able to admit that we've suffered. I think that's one of the most damaging aspects of traumatic experience. First, there's the injury itself of the trauma, and then there's the silence that kind of evolves out of the trauma, that gets provoked out of the trauma, which is just hideous, absolutely hideous. Again, I cannot encourage enough people to remember that, whether one is an activist or one seeking to heal, whatever you are, wherever you are, community is the best answer. Try to find a community. Try to develop in yourself a sense of compassion. Compassion is so difficult. We live in a time where compassion has been exiled. We could make a dozen million arguments about why we're in the political situation we are now, one night before election day, after 4 years of the country being severely damaged on every level, our institutions being ravaged. And I think part of the reason we're in the situation we're in, it's such a polarized situation is because compassion is just no longer considered valuable. It's almost impossible to get likes and retweets when it comes to compassion. That's not what works in a social media economy. Going after people, being fucked up, making absurd little jokes, that flies. Well, compassion doesn't fly. Therefore, the algorithm doesn't encourage it, and certainly isn't being encouraged by the larger society. Look at our president, the least compassionate human being. And to say that, it's quite a kind of a distinction. And so therefore, I would say, if you're suffering, try to build community, try to find people, use whatever resources you can, ask people, and then try to develop a practice of compassion. First of all, the first question you have to ask yourself is, do you even have an operational definition for compassion? You don't know how many seniors at university I have who don't even have a very good sense of what compassion really means. And how can you practice compassion if you don't even have a definition for it? And so some of these elementary moves, and they sound ridiculous, but they're a good beginning. They're a good beginning.
Could you describe it for us? Could you use a beautiful definition of compassion?
Do I have to? Can people just look it up? I think it would be great if people look it up. But look, I won't cheat you. I just, there's a part of me that's a teacher to the core, and of course I'm like, I'll look it up. But look, there's kind of sympathy, there's empathy, right? When you feel, right, or you can imagine other people suffering. Compassion is when you can imagine and you can feel other people suffering, and you want to do something about it, right? Compassion invites action. It invites sort of kind of responsible behavior. Compassion towards yourself, right, is all compassion is always surrounded by this idea of generosity, right? A prosecutor is not compassionate. A person who's looking for excuses to hate you is not compassionate. That's not compassion, right? If you're always mad at yourself for failing, that's not compassion. Compassion is forgiving. Compassion is generous, right? And that's the spirit with which you approach things, right? And then you want to make things better for yourself, right? But you don't make things better for yourself by being mean and cruel. So let's say I'm a procrastinator, right? I'm a procrastinator. Well, one is going to approach procrastination certainly more successfully if one is first compassionate. I mean, what? You're going to tell yourself, you suck. Come on, let's do this. I don't know, my dude. I'm not sure that's going to damn work. Maybe it worked for a short while, but it's not going to work forever.
Love for yourself and love for the people around you and empathy. Definitely.
Yeah, a sense of compassion, a sense of generosity, and then a desire to act, to do something about it, right? To take measures of remediation, right? Because a lot of times we have sympathy for, let's say we're a procrastinator, we'll have empathy for ourselves. We're like, oh, I feel bad, I'm a procrastinator. But there's no activity, there's no action there. Compassion would be like, you know what? You're okay. You're beautiful. This is out of some issue, deeper issue. Let's do one small thing that we can agree, one tiny thing to move this along a little bit better. Doesn't have to be big. And if we fail, let's not get mad at ourselves. Let's try again. Let's enlist some resources. Let's get some friends to help us. Let's not do this alone. Right? The other thing about compassion is that it's collective. It's not about isolating yourself.